Do you spend hours in your head thinking about something that happened, could have happened, or might happen? Do you ask others what to do so you don't make a mistake? Welcome to the Playing It Safe podcast. I am Dr. Z, your host. I am a clinical psychologist, an author, and a person that is super passionate about sharing with you science-based skills to overcome any type of fear-based struggles. Who doesn't experience fear? Who doesn't play it safe? In this show, we will discuss how fear-based reactions happen in day-to-day life, how playing it safe behaviors look like, sound like, and feel like, how you can put into action solid tips from behavioral science to get unstuck from worries, fears, obsessions, and anxieties, and how you can start doing what works, what matters, and what you care about. Behavioral science doesn't have to be boring. Thanks for listening, and let's get started. Hello, everybody. Believe it or not, I am recording the intro to this episode in Santa Cruz, Bolivia, where I am from. I came here to spend the holidays with my family and to catch up with friends, even though it's a little bit tricky to do so in the midst of a pandemic. I don't know how much you know about Bolivia, but it's a magical place, and the city where I am at right now, Santa Cruz, is the warmest and the hottest city in the country. Just to give an idea, in a typical day, the average temperature in Santa Cruz is 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and the lowest temperature could be 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, in December, during the summer, the temperature usually reaches 95 degrees Fahrenheit. So basically, every single day since I have landed here, I have woke up with a bright sun and the temperature reaching like 94 degrees Fahrenheit around 7 a.m. in the morning. It's ultra hot and it's ultra humid. I am afraid I have become a sweating machine. As my body adjusts to this gorgeous weather and while sipping a lot of cups of delicious Bolivian coffee, I started reading poetry. So before we jump into the episode, I want to share with you a poem written by Mario Benedetti. The poem is titled Tactic and Strategy. My tactic is to look at you, to learn how you are, love you as you are. My tactic is to talk to you and listen to you and construct with words an indestructible bridge. My tactic is to stay in your memory. I don't know how, nor with what pretext, but I stay within you. My tactic is to be honest and know you are too, and that we don't sell each other illusions, so that between us there is no curtain or abyss. My strategy instead is deeper and simpler. My strategy is that someday, I don't know how, nor with what pretext, that finally you need me. This is a poem translated by Chris Kroll, and I have to say, Latin poets, my goodness, they are trouble. So let me switch gears into the episode of today. We often play it safe by hiding, avoiding, minimizing, and acting as if we are not struggling. But it is human to struggle. It is human to ask for compassion. It is human to be embarrassed, and it's human to be vulnerable. In this conversation with Seth Gillihan, he kindly shares his health struggles, how he uses behavioral steps to navigate his day, how he uses mindfulness to distinguish what he has control of and what he doesn't, how he deals with feelings of shame. In the second part of my conversation with Seth, you will learn how he and his daughter collaborated together to write a CBT deck for kids and teens. I hope this conversation is helpful, and I also hope that it motivates you to be more compassionate with yourself. And I want to finish this intro with a quote from Bob Dylan. You must be vulnerable to be sensitive to reality. And to me, being vulnerable is just another way of saying that one has nothing more to lose. I don't have anything by darkness to lose, and I am way beyond that. Okay, see you next week. Thank you so much for making the time to chat with me today.
Well, it's a pleasure, Patricia. I've been looking forward to this. I enjoyed having you on my podcast, and this is a nice way to reconnect.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm a big fan of your work. You have been reading a lot of books. You publish a couple of deck cards. So I think the pleasure is mine. I'm super excited to chat with you today.
Great. We'll see where this goes.
That's right. Let's see where it goes. And I'm wondering if you don't mind sharing, what are you up to these days? How you spend your time?
Yeah, so I'm a clinical psychologist, and things have shifted over the past few years. I used to do almost all clinical work, seeing people in my therapy office or through teletherapy. And then in the past couple of years, I've really shifted to doing more writing, more. I consult with a mental health app called Bloom, and do podcasting and creating resources like the CBT decks. I just had a CBT flip chart that came out for therapists to use in session. So it's really been a shift, but I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed kind of moving into these other areas and trying to find new ways to spread CBT techniques, effective techniques, especially for things like depression, anxiety, and stress, stuff that so many of us are dealing with. Oh, and along those lines, I just started a YouTube channel as well. So lots of things going on.
Oh my goodness. It sounds super cool. If I can ask a little bit more, how did the shift happen? Because I think many times in our training, we have been exposed to different ways of practicing psychology, right? Like in hospitals, in private practice, but creating content is something that we haven't been exposed to much in our training. So I'm just curious, how did you end up there?
Well, it's interesting because on paper, it looks like a fairly straight shot from there to here. But so there were, when I was still doing full-time clinical practice, I was getting involved in writing books. I was approached by a publisher to write my two CBT books, Retrain Your Brain and Cognitive Behavioral Therapy Made Simple. But I was still, a full-time therapist at that point. But I wanted to get more involved in, these other types of avenues. And it really was out of necessity, was a lot of it, because I got really sick a few years ago with just a chronic condition, and a lot of somewhat not very well-defined symptoms, exhaustion. Common ones people would recognize, sort of syndrome of things. And there are some possible explanations, like mold seems to be part of the picture. And it's definitely related to stress, if not caused in large part by stress as well. So that just, required me to find a new way of working. I just couldn't meet the demands of full-time practice with it's all synchronous. So you have to be at a certain place at a certain time. You have to be awake, which wasn't always the case. Actually, I was having to take a lot of naps, and that actually there were a couple times when I slept through a session. The other person wasn't in the room. I was supposed to have a session. Both of them, thankfully, were supposed to be virtual. So the person wasn't actually at my office wondering where I was or why I wasn't opening the door. But that wasn't the kind of practice that I had ever run or intended to run. So I still see people on a limited basis, but I had to move away from that. And I think it's been, really challenging on the one hand, but these other things have been very rewarding and meaningful too.
It's incredible that we go through in life lead us to open new doors. I can see what you're saying. Last year, actually, I was dealing with some chronic fatigue issues. My iron level was extremely low.
Wow.
So usually I have this popcorn energy. But
yeah.
because of the iron levels, my days shrunk to maybe 6-7 hours. My whole life had to reschedule and had to be reorganized. It's really one of those things that we have to figure out, what can I do within this amount of time, with this amount of energy, right? So kudos to you for creating a new path for you that fits where you are, where your body is.
I appreciate that. I mean, I appreciate your sharing too about your own health issues. And I obviously, you do a lot of acceptance and commitment therapy. And I think about, in the mindfulness way of thinking, it's so much about accepting where we are and working with that. And I think about this. I was a couple of years ago, I couldn't get tomato steaks. I couldn't get the tall ones that I needed, and so I kept feeling like, the steaks that I have are too short. This, it's so frustrating. Then I realized, like, maybe the problem is my plants are too tall. Like, and that's something I could control. So, that again, it's like I don't have enough energy to do what I need to do. It's like, well, maybe you have too much stuff to do, given how much energy you have.
Isn't that fascinating? And if we can talk a little bit about that, I know for me it was actually really, really hard. I had to say no to hundreds of things. I had to request extensions because it was humanly impossible to go beyond 7-8 hours of functioning. And like you, there was one time in which I am between sessions and I'm laying down on the floor holding an ice cube on my forehead. So I think it was a values-based move to say no to many things that really mattered to me, but I just couldn't, right? I have to shrink and shrink. How was for you? How did you reach that place?
I mean, it only took about 4 years, I think, right. I mean, to come to that place of acceptance of, like, because I just kept pushing myself. I kept, dragging myself to the office, just exhausted, crying sometimes on the way to work. Just like, I just felt like I had nothing to give, and crying on the way home. But I have to tell you, I mean, a lot of my ideas came from that period, just based on things that I was dealing with myself. So my second CBT book I wrote really in the thick of that period, and I think this the kind of the deeper empathy and compassion that I had just based on my own experience, and the deep depression that I ended up in, I feel like ended up infusing that book, and then a lot of the techniques that I was using, just simple day-to-day things based in CBT, like, made it into my CBT card decks, because just coming up with all these things, like, from literally from morning till bedtime, like things I needed to do to train my mind and to practice certain behaviors and a way of being present.
Can I ask a little bit more about this? As you're figuring out how your day has to be rescheduled and you are really breathing and living all these CBT skills, you mentioned that at the beginning you were pushing and pushing yourself. And I think that's perhaps the most common experience that we all go through. We have a hard time letting it go, and we get attached to how things were and the things that we could do in the past. How was that shift for you?
Well, I mean, I was embarrassed for a long time to admit, that I was going through anything. I mean, to admit outside my family, and I guess even to admit to myself that I had these limitations. I really, I mean, I was making all the kinds of, self-attributions that we teach our clients to work through, like, saying that I'm weak, I'm pathetic, I hated myself. And I think it really came down to finally realizing, like, I just have to, like, it's not really an option. I have to, I mean, I just have to do what, like we were talking about before, I have to work with what I have. And that was, and also, when I finally talked with people about it, and shared that I was having, going through these things, everyone, I think, that I can remember sharing that with was just so concerned and caring, and just, wanted me to get better. Like, I was afraid if I told, a patient, I'm going to have to, meet less often or whatever, that they would, that they would only be thinking about what that meant for them. But with, like, to a person, everyone was like, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that, whatever you need, like, I completely understand. I always find that so touching, when people that I'm working to help, and I always feel a lot of emotion when I realize this, but there's that reciprocity,
Yeah,
that the care, I guess, comes back in a way.
yeah, yeah. And I'm wondering if when you start sharing with others, that in some way shift that the states of shame or feeling ashamed of what you were going through. I wonder if there is any relationship on that. Because I know for me, I haven't talked publicly about this. You are the first person I'm sharing in a
Ah,
podcast about the comments. My goodness, right? Because I have come a very low key. I tend to be social, but very private as well. But I think I was like you, in some way embarrassed, scared about what my clients may think of my own competence as a psychologist.
right.
Scared about will they get to worry about me. So I'm just curious how it was for you when you put it out there and you got these beautiful, caring responses in
Mm.
terms of dealing with shame.
Yeah, it's interesting. When we think about fear and facing fears, I often think of, the more we run from fear, the bigger the monster behind us is in our imagination. And when we turn around, we realize like, oh, okay. Like it's not this scary demon that I thought it was. And I guess in a similar way, it feels like facing what it was that I was ashamed of and being more open about it just kind of made it dissolve. Like I didn't feel ashamed.
Mm-hmm.
I felt, and I think this is what makes me cry about is I felt loved.
Mm-hmm.
And that, just really, I think is the opposite of fear and probably the opposite of shame too.
It's incredible how we get surprised and shocked sometimes we experience those responses from others. But we're wired to be caring with each other. I think our mind gets busy and we forget that when we
Right.
hear those caring responses, like, oh my gosh, it's so real. Um, Given that experience, as you find different things that you need to do in your day-to-day life to keep doing what you do, or to create new things, how did you continue practicing some form of self-compassion or caring behaviors towards yourself? Like if I bump into you, let's say 2 years ago, and you're having a tough day in which you are exhausted and perhaps have other types of body noise, but you are more gentle with yourself and you are more caring, what will I see you doing? How will that look inside?
Right. Yeah. Well, let me start with what you would see on the outside because I think that was, I probably led the way with that. What I mean is, in CBT, we often talk about you change behavior and then your thoughts and feelings can change as a result. And I think that was probably the biggest thing for me is just, being willing, like when I was tired, to not push through, to take a nap when I needed to.
Mm-hmm.
And to, as you were saying, like to say no to certain invitations, even if normally in the past I would have done them. For a long time, and still most days, it meant having enough. Like I know at a certain point in the day, I'll tend to need a nap, and so I won't schedule things straight through. But that's so much of it is about the day that I plan for myself. And I
Mm-hmm.
used to just plan, back to back to back to back, not even time for lunch.
Mm-hmm.
So now it's starting the day with some devotional reading and meditation, and then usually some yoga or some light exercise. A little bit of work in the morning. My diet it wasn't bad before, but it's much more healthful now. I go for about a 45-minute walk most days. Every day, but most days with my wife. We go together. I take an actual lunch break now. And I used to, even until, I don't know, a few months ago, not that long ago, I would often work beyond, I would work past 5, even though I start work usually around 5 in the morning because one of my symptoms is I wake up really early.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would end up, kind of overextended and stressed out, trying to get dinner ready, and the nighttime crunch with our 3 kids and everything would get squeezed. And so now, I tend to stop earlier
Mm-hmm.
and have just more space to do things, so I don't have that constant sense of pressure and stress.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Can I ask a little bit more about it? Given that we live in such a fast and busy time, and there is so much pressure to get things done and get moving, and sometimes to power through, I'm wondering what was helpful to have that mindset that the day has X number of hours. This is as much as I can do, and I can let this other stuff go.
Yeah, a lot of it was just realizing the effects of when I'd push through versus when I would, be kinder to myself. I think part of it is just a realization in the past few years that that our common way of living, and I don't use this, I don't mean to be disrespectful with this term, but is insane. I think we tend to, the average way of living, I think, is fairly insane. And this idea that the kind of, I mean, it's so common, this assumption that we should sacrifice our well-being in order for, to work more, to get more done, to be more, quote unquote productive.
Mm-hmm.
And I certainly bought into that completely. But yeah, I've just come to see more clearly that that's not really where it is.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate a lot the realness of what you're sharing. I don't think it's sustainable, the pace that we are forced to live. We get so disconnected from the things that are really important to us.
One thing I should add is, or I feel compelled to add, is that it's such a privilege for me to be able to have a flexible work schedule and, and work fewer hours and still make ends meet. And so I wouldn't want any of our listeners to think that, to blame themselves for those things, when I think so many people have to work two jobs, just to, keep food on the table and lights on. And I think that I think that part of the insanity is that we live in a society where we're okay with that, where we're okay with people working, full time and living below the poverty line, or just not having things that seem like humane things to, in a society like ours, that a person who works full time should, I think, have everything that they need.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's my judgment of it. So I mean, I'm just, reflecting as I talk about my own shifts. I wouldn't assume that everyone has those things available, and it is quite a privilege to do that.
Yeah, well, I think you're right on the sense that the reality of each one of us is different. It's not going to be the same. And the question perhaps is, if there are restrictions in a person's day-to-day life, what are the tiny adjustments that a person could make to still prioritize their well-being? It doesn't have to be necessarily a big shift. Everyone has a different living situation. But I think we still can remember that there is something about taking care of ourselves versus going with the fast pace of living life. If I can go back to these questions on the outside, you are taking care of yourself and managing things by going for a walk, taking care of the food you eat, organizing your day in a way there is extra room to reset a little bit. And what about in the inside? If there is the urge to do more, of fears about not doing enough, how do you handle that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it varies day to day, but one of the best gifts that came out of this period of real struggle and suffering was, I finally realized in a flash that I'm loved.
Mm-hmm.
Like it hit me, and I think that has made all the difference. That's something I can rest in, that awareness that I don't, like I can still find myself, pushing and thinking I have to do more, I have to get this out, I have to get this blog post out today or whatever. But so much of that, I think, is driven by this feeling of not being enough. And a lot of that is, for a lot of us, is related to not loving ourselves, or not feeling like we're loved, or not feeling like, I mean, for me, it was, this long standing assumption based on my upbringing, that that God didn't love me, and or if God did, it was in a very kind of irritated way,
Oh, wow.
like right, like, yeah, sure, I love you because I have to.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. My mind is going with so many questions with the story of that thought.
Yes, yeah, I know. Yeah, it's such a story, and finally, um, yeah, letting go of that, I think that's made a huge difference. And I mean, so a person doesn't have to assume anything about God, I think, or the divine, but I think anyone can, question these assumptions about not being enough or not being lovable or not being adequate. And that, yeah, I think that internal shift then can facilitate some of those externals we were talking about. Like, give yourself a break, have a nice lunch, give yourself enough time between meetings to go to the bathroom.
Thank you for sharing again. I think it's incredible how we can be so kind with others, and it's so hard to be kind with ourselves. Sometimes one of the blocks that I hear, and certainly I had experienced that to some degree, is this fear of letting ourselves off the hook. And I'm wondering if you experience something like that. This struggle is just being caring with yourself when you needed to do so.
It is. It's, and I know that. I know that feeling of I don't want to let myself off the hook. But then when I hear that phrase, I mean, being on the hook doesn't sound like a very comfortable place to be.
It's not.
I mean, we have that assumption I should be on the hook. But yes, I think. I think it's also a bit of an exposure. When we face that fear of, if I let myself off the hook, things are going to fall apart, or I'm gonna fall apart. And then we do it a little bit, and we realize, like, oh, things didn't fall apart. And self-compassion, surprise. I mean, I think a lot of us, myself included, certainly in the beginning with all this, self-compassion can feel kind of grossly indulgent.
Mm-hmm.
But really, I think self-compassion, if what we care about is productivity, I think we'll probably end up actually being more productive if we can give ourselves a little or a lot of compassion.
That's right. The more caring we are with ourselves, the more effective and productive we may be. Speaking about that, if I can switch gears a little bit, you mentioned that this time of struggling with health matters was in some way the context in which you start creating other types of resources. And I'm wondering if you can share a little bit how it was for you to come up with the last deck that you came up with your daughter, the ones for anxiety and stress. What was the process of collaborating with her? It will be super cool to hear behind the scenes.
Yeah, that was so fun because I'd wanted to work with her for a while. She'd gone through a lot of anxiety and told me that she had found my original CBT deck to be really helpful.
Wow.
As part of, I know, which I actually didn't know that at the time. She had taken my the review copy that I got and the what do they call that, proofs. And kept them by her bed, and she was using one to help her, through this period, using one each day to help her through this period. And I thought, oh, that'd be cool at some point, to adapt it for kids, and to work on it with Ada, to make it, so I would have her, stamp of approval. This was kid friendly. So then, with the pandemic, and so many young people experiencing, anxiety, overwhelming stress, depression, suicidal thoughts. I talked with my publisher about, how about a deck, for kids for this time, and they love the idea. They're really happy to have Ada on board as my co-author. So we would, looking back, I am so appreciative to her for the time that she took, because, this was during what would that have been, 2020 to 2021 school year. So she would, on her breaks between, her Zoom sessions for class, we would sit down and work for, maybe a half hour or so. We'd go through, first we just went through the existing CBT deck and pulled out practices that could, be good for kids that she felt like, she really connected with and that her peers could. And then, chose the ones that we wanted and then went through and we just edit them one by one, so, is this something you would say? Do kids say that? Is that an expression that kids talk about? Like embrace uncertainty, and she would tell me like, I don't really think anyone my age says that, or I'm not exactly sure what that means. And so, and it was really fun because, we were sitting side by side, like shoulder to shoulder, looking at these things, typing on my computer together sometimes. And there was a feeling like we knew when we got it, there'd be that sense of like, yeah, that's not quite it. That's not quite it. Oh yeah, that's it. And it would resonate with both of us. We would know like, all right, that's done, on to the next one. That was a lot of fun. And she was really helpful too in picking out the types of graphics that we wanted for it, because, it's really important that this be visual and engaging. And it took a while, to find what we wanted and to work with a publisher to get it just right. But I'm really, really happy with how it turned out.
It's amazing that she actually grabbed your book and she started using it in her own, and then you guys collaborate together. What would you encourage teenagers or parents that are interested in getting the deck?
Well, I mean, I think it's great if kids can be in control of it as much as possible, so they really feel like it's theirs. They have some agency in it. And then I mean, so the deck is divided into 3 types of cards: think, act, and be. So cognitive, behavioral, and mindfulness types of practices. And I just encourage people to use usually 1 card a day. Just pull a card at random if you like, and then just practice that skill for that day. If you draw one that doesn't really, you're like, yeah, I'm not sure that that's exactly what I'm dealing with today. Draw another one. So it's your deck. It's to use as you like. Some people like to use it with a therapist, which I think could be good. I think for younger kids, I mean, so it's for ages probably around maybe like a, mature 7-year-old to maybe like a younger, 14, 15-year-old. On the younger end, I think it can be nice to work, for a parent to work with them, to maybe help them if there are words that they don't understand, or they can just practice together. I mean, I love the practices myself. They're really not limited to certain ages. So I think parents as much as kids, I think can benefit from these too. And I think it's great if the whole family can be involved.
That would be cool. They are really universal skills. We all will get the benefit of practicing them,
Absolutely.
even if they're not having high levels of anxiety, right?
That's right.
Kudos to you and to both of you for creating something so actionable.
Yeah, I like it to be bite-sized, manageable. So our stress management techniques, I think, should not be stress-inducing.
That's right, like my writing.
No, well, I wouldn't say that.
I'm just kidding. Thank you again for making the time to chat. Time goes so fast. I only have one more question. If you were to have a chance to have a cup of tea or coffee with any person you want, who would that be and why?
Yeah, who would it be? I mean, I have two ideas come to mind. One is, maybe just with my kids, like, because they're, those relationships, that's really where we find so much of our connections, just with our closest relationships. And then, I think about famous people. I'm like most famous people I think about, I don't imagine it's probably more fun to like watch them, in a movie or something than to have a cup of coffee with them.
If you were to have extra time with your kids, what would you be curious about today?
I would just be interested to know more about their worlds, because it's so often you get the response, like, hey, how's school today? Fine.
That's right, a monosyllabic response.
Yeah. So I'd love to know more about their inner worlds. I'll have to give more thought to the famous person one. Thomas Merton.
Oh, wow.
I'd love to speak with him. Yeah, with him. Living person, I think it'd be would love to talk with Richard Rohr, um, David Steindl-Rast.
Okay, I don't know David Steindl-Rast.
He does. He's also a monk, and he's done a TED Talk on gratitude. He's written several lovely books. If he were still living, Richard Mullins, who was a Christian singer and songwriter. But the people that come to mind are ones who, in my mind, saw through and see through the kind of veil that we tend to observe the world through, and it feels like they saw clearly, in a way that they sort of saw with the eyes of the Spirit. And I would just love to talk with them, but I think also just to experience what it's like to be with them.
Thank you so much again. It has been such a pleasure to chat with you and have a real conversation.
Well, this has been great, Patricia. Thank you very much for the time. Thanks for your sensitivity and the questions that you asked, and I look forward to the next time.
Thanks for listening. If you like this episode, I will very much appreciate it if you will subscribe and share this podcast with your friends. And if you're feeling extra generous, I welcome a review on Apple Podcasts. Show notes of this episode are in the website playingitsafe.zone. Make sure to subscribe to my newsletter so you can receive more tips to stop all types of unworkable playing it safe actions. See you soon!